That was a really great talk, and I think there are a lot of questions. So feel free, and this goes for any talk, feel free to continue that conversation out in the halls. We have that space open for you guys to continue the conversation with the presenter. But listen, I'm really excited to have you guys here today, not just at my talk, but I just mean at the Commit Your Code conference in general. Thank you for showing up and listening to great presentations, learning something, and also supporting charity. You guys are the community. This is the reason why we're doing it. Thanks for showing up. Well, my name is Braydon. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 little girls. I'm a senior front-end engineer, and I'm also one of the organizers here at the conference. In this talk, we're going to briefly look at what's new in Tailwind CSS version 4. The beta for version 4 was tagged about 2 weeks ago. I know there's been some more recent updates since then, but there's a lot of great stuff to love, and that's what we're going to just briefly dive into today. We're not going to go too in-depth on any one topic, but hopefully there's something new you didn't know about, and we can dive in together. So, has anybody not used Tailwind? You lying to me, Mark? No? Okay, I hear you. All right. Well, what is Tailwind? At its core, Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework that was originally released, I think, in 2017, gaining popularity very quickly, and it helps you build custom designs quickly and efficiently. So instead of writing CSS classes, maybe using a naming convention like block element modifier, with Tailwind, you use predefined classes to directly in your HTML, and we'll take a look at this in a minute, to style your components. And these classes, each one has a specific design that's applied to a specific behavior on your elements, and they'll be reused across your application. So let's look real quick. What does this look like? I'm going to zoom in. This is taken directly from the Tailwind website, but these are utility classes. You can see that they're named sort of semantically. So just at a glance, you can see what that utility is doing to that element. So you can see here we've got some Flexbox stuff going on. We're applying a specific font. We've got some padding, right? And we could have a debate about the readability of this and everything, but it's really quick. It's really quick to just prototype, to build stuff out for production. It's really cool. Okay, I'll zoom back out. So what's new? Starting things off with a big one. Version 4 is a ground-up rewrite of Tailwind CSS. It's written, I think, primarily in Rust, which makes Tailwind now exceptionally fast. Okay, I have a little graphic here. Maybe you can see the little pop-up, maybe not. But on the left, on the far left, we have Tailwind version 3, the amount of time it takes to do a full rebuild. That's 378 milliseconds on average. Okay, now what about Tailwind version 4? A full rebuild, on average, 100 milliseconds. That's crazy gains, right? Now, what about incremental builds? Incremental builds, 44 milliseconds for Tailwind version 3. Version 4, it's hard to see, right? It's 5 milliseconds. That's crazy. It makes things lightning fast. And speaking of lightning, under the hood, Tailwind is using Lightning CSS to automatically process your styles and take care of tasks like adding vendor prefixes and converting your features, your modern features, maybe for compatibility for like older browsers and things like that, and more. So I haven't updated my personal site to use Tailwind yet, but I'm really interested to see from a developer experience point of view how quickly things build and refresh, but also just to use a lot of these cool new features that are coming with version 4. Okay, what's next? See you later, Tailwind config. This is a big one for me because Tailwind version 4 is migrating to a CSS-first configuration. This means that we no longer need to configure things like colors, theming variables, fonts, things like that inside of a JavaScript file. We can do it all within the root CSS file of our project. So how do we do this? Tailwind will define and use a theme layer that allows you to declare those things, variables. You can see here, fonts, new colors, things like that. Things for your animations even. It's all done within your root CSS file. Now you may notice here that the color variables are actually declared with this odd looking notation. OKLCH. Has anybody heard of that? Okay, a few. This is awesome. Okay, Ryan, of course, naturally, right? So what is that? Well, I'm glad you asked because Tailwind V4 ships with a brand new color palette. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, thank you. It has a lot of subtle differences because of this new notation, but I think overall in your application, it's going to make a pretty big impact. The new palette migrates away from RGB in version 3 to this new color space, OKLCH, resulting in a wider gamut, which actually means that there's more colors available to use in the space, right? I didn't even know that was a thing. So take a look at this. Let me scroll down. Here's an online tool that helps you visualize the new colors in the OKLCH space. And everything, let me zoom in, everything below, can you guys see that? Below that black line was kind of the limit of color values in RGB, okay? Everything above that line is what's now unlocked because of this new color space. So Tailwind V4, lots of new options, and they have modified the color palette to include that, which is great. Has anybody ever written a line of Tailwind? Because I know most of you guys have written this. Something like this, like you're setting a height, and you're using these brackets, and you're setting it to like 245, yeah, 245 pixels for the height, right? This is called arbitrary value in Tailwind. So you can apply these arbitrary values to your elements, which essentially allow you to use any spacing or value in Tailwind, even if it's not included in the default spacing or sizing scale by default, like out of the box. So while using these arbitrary values, I think should be sort of rare if it's not already configured in your Tailwind config. I do think there are some situations where it could be useful. But now with Tailwind V4, you shouldn't have to use arbitrary values nearly as much because V4 ships with a dynamic scale, meaning you can pretty much throw any value you want in there and it'll take care of it like on the fly. It's really, really cool. And this is great because now I can change my ugly like grid utility here, grid rows 14. This is something I have on my personal site. That 14 value to get those 14 rows is not something that's supported out of the box with Tailwind. And so I just slapped that on my markup. Now I can just actually natively write it, and it's really cool. So this change is great because I can now transform that, use any values that I want to. But I'm sure there's some Tailwind vets in here that may have their spidey senses tingling because now we can just throw anything in there and it might work. You know, if it's not strictly adhering to the design guide of your designers or whatever, then you could run into some issues like things may not line up properly or whatever. But the good news is that you should be able to mitigate some of this using the spacing variable in your theme, and you can disable that and explicitly include an exhaustive list of all values that your developers can use. So that's like taken care of, and it's great to know that the team has thought through that. Next up is 3D transformations. So another nice addition here are these new APIs for 3D transformations. So now we have the ability to control things like rotation on the x-axis and the y-axis, or scaling on the z-axis, perspective utilities, and that's all done through the transform 3D utility here that you see. And let me open this up. So this is the Tailwind site. This is the V4 docs. And you can see here we've got some nice hover animations utilizing this new perspective utility along with the Transform 3D API. So really cool stuff. I will have links to all this, by the way, at the end of the slides, so you can go check it out, play with some of this stuff on your own. All right, gradients. Another big win in V4 is that, at least for me, the Tailwind team has finally shown gradients some love. So the big change here is that gradients no longer need to use the BG gradient like TR, that's two rights, so you're creating a gradient kind of like this. We don't have to use those utilities anymore because we can actually pass in values or angles as values for our gradients. So that's a big change and one that I think mentally makes a lot of sense. And finally, we have support for conic and radial gradients in V4. This is something that wasn't really possible in V3. I think you could do some hacks and stuff like that. But officially, conic and radial gradients are coming to Tailwind with V4. And we're going to use maybe one of these here in a minute, but let's move on real quick. Okay. So in my view, those are like some of the big standout features of V4, but it also will ship with a bunch of small tweaks that boost the developer experience and include new functionality. Things like automatic source detection. Do you guys remember in your Tailwind config, you had to define where you want Tailwind to actually look and apply those utility classes, right? We don't have to do that anymore. V4 will do that for us automatically. That's great. Other things like container query support out of the box. V3 had this, but you had to use a plugin, right? V4 out of the box container queries. That's great. The not selector variants, descendant variants, which we'll use here in a minute, field sizing utilities, and then I really like this one, the inset shadows and rings brings a whole new opportunity to create some really cool effects. But let's just really quickly jump over and do some live coding. I have a Vite project set up locally that I've installed the beta for Tailwind. You can see that here. And then part of their installation guide on their site will walk you through this, but you need to go to your Vite config, you need to import the Tailwind CSS plugin, and then you are good to go. So inside of our root CSS file, we are importing Tailwind. That's all in the file. And here's my main app component. So the thing that I'm going to do here, let's just see if this works. Let's add an H1. We'll say, hello, commit your code. And maybe we'll wave too. Make it bigger? Yeah, no problem. How's that? Good stuff? Thank you. Okay, so hello, commit your code. Let's add some wave. Let's check this out. Okay, there it is. It's really small though, right? So let's make this bigger. Let's add text. Let's do 5XL. Let's make this text slate 900. Okay, a little bit better. Maybe we'll do a font bold even. Okay, so you can see how quickly I'm like iterating on this and making changes and seeing it live. It's rebuilding instantly. It's really cool. Okay, let's try and use some of these new features. So let me create a div. I'm going to add the grid utility on it. I'm going to do grid calls 12. Let's do BG red 500. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a bunch of individual grid items. So we'll do width of 12. We'll do BG. Let's do teal. Now let's do yellow. Oh, this is going to look great. 500. And let's make 12 of those. Okay. Oh, yeah. That's great. Festive, maybe. Shoot, maybe we even make this. Let's add some spacing. Okay. Okay, there we go. So that's 12. Out of the box in V3, we could have 12 columns. That's fine. So what happens if I add another item here? It'll just go to the next row. It's hard to see. Let me add some gap. Okay, so here's our extra item, okay? It moves on to the next row because there's only 12 rows, or 12 columns, sorry. So now what I can do, out of the box, Tailwind V3, only 12 columns. Let's add 13 here. Boom. How cool is that? Did I touch this? I don't know. Now we have 13 columns. Super cool. Okay. Let's use a new conic gradient. Let me go back to my slides, and actually, here's the Tailwind V4 beta docs. Let's look for conic. I'm going to grab this just so to save us some time here. And let's put this here. And let's go back to our site. You need to add some padding to make this a little bit easier to see. Okay, that's really cool to me because this was not possible in V3. And now we have the option to do this natively in V4. Some things to note here, we have this HSL longer hue, which essentially means that in the way that it's calculating the transition between colors, it's not going to go the shortest route to that new color. It's actually, I think, going to go the longest route. So that's how we get that nice wide range of colors in this background. Really cool. A lot of options to choose from here. Okay, well, what if we want to, instead of using yellow 500, what if we want to define our own color? Well, we can go straight over to our index CSS, and we'll use this new layer. It's called theme. This is supported by Tailwind. And let's create a new color variable called taco. We had some tacos for lunch. I'll create a 500, and let's go over here. And I just happen to have up our converter, our tool that we saw earlier. This will also allow you to convert RGB and hex over to OKLCH. So I'm going to copy that over, and I'm just going to use that as a value right here. Pretty cool. And now I can go over to my markup, and instead of yellow, let's use, I'm going to delete this so we can see how this works. BG Taco 500. And you can see even our IntelliSense is updated automatically on the fly to include that. And if I save, go back to our sites, check that out. Super cool, super easy, way easier mentally, in my opinion, to create new custom colors rather than digging into your Tailwind config file, a JavaScript file. Yes, you have a question? Sure. I think so, right? I think so, yeah. And I know Tailwind supports both light and dark themes, and they have a really interesting way of changing between the two. In your config specifically, obviously in Tailwind you can use the dark modifier to specifically apply styles in a dark environment. But in the theme itself, there is a really interesting way that they're doing it, and I think they might have changed it in V4. So I think you're right. I think it is easier now to create multiple different themes in your application if you want to. Yeah, it is cool. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Well, what if we want to add a new font? Before you had to find the specific setting in your Tailwind config and change it. Well, let's just go ahead and define a new font. We'll call this cool font. I'll use font twice, right? And we'll set this to Satoshi. And for a fallback, we'll just set it to sans serif. Cool. And we'll save that. Back in our app, all we have to do is use fonts, cool fonts, I think. Yeah, and here we go. So you can see it's using this new value. Let me zoom in. And you can even see it in the popover in the dev tools. You can see 48 pixels, and it's using that new font right here. Really cool, really easy to make changes on the fly. Terrible name for a font, but you guys get the idea, right? Okay, well, how can we use the new descendant selector? Let's give this a try. So in our first grid item, let's go ahead and create a new item. I'm going to give it the same thing, width of 12, and let's give it a background of, let's just do yellow 500. Okay, so now it should cover up our taco color underneath. But what if we want to select that from a parent element? Let's give it a shot. So we'll use the new descendant selector, which is ***, and we can change this to rounded 2XL. Now, every element inside of that parent is going to be selected, right? We can narrow this down even further using a data attribute. So if we come over here, and this is like a nested element, right? Super cool. Let's just go ahead and do data rounded, okay? We go back and change this to, or let's change this to like data circle, not to get confused with the rounded utility. So now up here, we can actually, in our selector, choose data circle rounded 2XL, and now only the element within that's laid on top of and nested inside of that taco, that taco element is going to be selected. This opens up some pretty cool possibilities when you want to make some really interesting selectors in Tailwind. Okay. That's the live demo. That's what I got for you. Let's go back to, yeah, thank you. On the fly coding, right? That's really all that I have. I want to make sure we have enough time for our other speaker to come up. But if you have questions, feel free to nerd out with me in the hallway. You can find me online on X at Braydon Coyer. I've got my own site. There's my LinkedIn. I've also included a few resources for you. So if you want to go check out the V4 beta docs, you absolutely can. I've included the link to the color tool, so you can play around with that. And then also Lightning CSS, which I also think is a really great tool that they're using under the hood. I found it interesting. I hope you do too. Okay. Any questions? I've got time. Sweet. They are in the slides, which I can get to you. So if you'd like them, feel free to find me afterwards. I meant to have a QR code, and then I actually think I deleted it, like right before coming up here. I came up here, I put it right here. It's gone. But I'd be happy to get that to you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, so you'll define it here, sorry, just like we did here. But if you're using like a custom font, not something pulled from Google, then you can have that imported into your repo if you want to. But otherwise, I think it's the exact same thing as V3. Or if you wanted to import a specific font from Google or something like that, you would use the previous way. You'd import it, you'd list it here, and then you just use this utility in your markup. Any questions? Okay. I'll be available outside if you want to talk about it. But thanks so much for showing up. We've got some really great talks coming up. Make sure you look at the schedule. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.